My name is Noah, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I wanted to discuss why it's absolutely crucial to have a fundamental understanding of not only how inflation works, but also how to understand how it plays a critical role in determining how much you should be making on a year-to-year basis. I have two examples for you, so with that being said, let's get right into the first example. Before I get into the first example, I thought it would be really wise to kind of review what inflation is and how it's kind of worked within the United States from the time someone basically started tracking it. So for those of you who do not know, inflation generally means and indicates the increase in the amount of money it will take to purchase a good or service from year to year or month to month for that matter. It can even be day to day in some cases as well. So the famous example, would be kind of like a gallon of milk or a dozen eggs, where one year it's $2 and, the following year it was $3, right? So you have, inflation in the cost that it's going to take to purchase that good in that case. And this is across, all services and all goods for the most part within the United States. I know there's quite a few numbers here. It's not important to get too hung up on all of them, but there are key takeaways that I would like to express before moving into the first example. So like I said, we have data from 1914 all the way up until 2022. And what I want to do is basically isolate periods of time to try to articulate what the best inflation rate would be for our example. Is it 5%? Is it 20%? Is it 1%? So what I did looking here is that I took away 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and then all-time years, and basically calculated what the average inflation rate was for that period. So let's start with 10, right? So for the last 10 years, right, 2022 to 2013, the inflation rate was 2.47%. 20 years, all the way back here, it was 2.47, 30 years, 2.49, 40 years, 2.82, 4.00, so 4%. Over the last 50 years, 60 years was 3.89%, and 70 years was 3.52. And finally, from all time, 1914 to 2022, the inflation rate on average was 3.2%. So out of those percentages, what one do we use? Do we use all of them? Do we just take one of them? What would be the best thing to do? So I think there's some people that would say, well, encompass them all in there. More data is always better, or whatever it may be. Personally, I don't think that's the entire story, just because, as time goes on, or laws change, processes change, systems change, and so on. So I don't think it's wise to go all the way back to 1914, because we live in a grossly different world than people did in the early 1900s, right? So what I want to do is I want to look, maybe for the first, 10 to 20 years to start, and see where we start from there. So we can see that between the last 10 and 20 years, the average inflation rate was exactly the same. And if we stretch back the last 30 years, it's not far off either, right? And even 40 years, it's a little bit different, but really, really similar. So for me, I think it is reasonable to kind of use the last 40 years of data to kind of move forward with the example that I'm going to present to you guys today. And, the average here is 2.5, let's see, it's 2.53, I think 2.56. Generally speaking, the Fed, likes to say that they want to keep inflation between 2 and 2.5% on an annual basis. So that's, it's pretty on par for the last 40 years at least. So for the following examples, I am going to use 2.5% as the annual inflation rate. Okay, here we are with our second example. In this example, we are going to be switching roles a little bit here, and basically switching over to an individual that is a salaried employee rather than a hourly employee. I'm sure many of you already know kind of the pros and cons that are associated with both. But generally speaking, people like to try to chase the salary position, because if you're salaried, if you do 10 hours of work, you're still paid for 40. If you do 0 hours of work, you're still paid for 40. So there's pros and cons for each, which I'm not going to get into in this video. But for this example, we're going to be jumping ship to an employee that is salaried. We will use Michael, the Muppet Man, maybe. Michael works at a Muppet manufacturing plant. I don't know, somewhere in Canada, right? I don't really care, but he was a previous line worker. Maybe he was hourly wage at that point, and his boss came to him, his manager came to him, and they said, we love the way you make Muppets. Let's have you work in IT as a, auditor, and we're going to switch you over to salary, right? We're going to switch you over. We're going to give you this amount. No matter how many hours you work, week you work, you're going to get the same amount, and so on and so on and so on. All of that stuff that your employer will let you know prior to you taking the position. So things are pretty much the same as they were. We have a year salary, your annual raise, which is obviously something that people hourly and salary will want to chase, right? We want to see our income going up year over year. I have inflation on here. Like I said, we're going to keep it at 2.5 consistently. Income to keep up. Did you keep up? And then the difference between the actual annual salary and what you need to keep up with inflation for that year. So now that we know all about Michael the Muppet Man, let's give him a salary, right? So let's say, let's start something nice and clean, 50,000. So his employer comes to him and they say, we're going to offer you $50,000 salary for your Muppet making skills, right? And like I said, we're not considering taxes, deductions, anything like that in this example. This is purely to showcase, how inflation plays a big part in your lifestyle and your income as well. So he was offered $50,000 at the beginning of 2023, and he was really stoked for it. He didn't have to work 50 hours anymore. He was just working a flat 40, which, in my opinion, can be too much in itself, right? But he's working 40 hours a week at $50,000 salary. So at the end of 2023, assuming that the inflation rate is 2.5%, which likely won't be the case, like I said previously, we're on track for 2023 to be about 5% or so. But let's just say we're in an imaginary world right now where it is 2.5%, right? That'd be great. So the income, keeping up with income here, season 1, episode 1, the income that Michael the Muppet Man will need to make going in to 2024, to keep up with the inflation from the last year is $51,250. So at the end of year, in his yearly meeting, him and his boss should have a conversation, and his boss would ideally say, inflation was kind of this much, so we're going to give you a pay increase to account for inflation, and we also want to give you a little bonus for your hard work, right? That's what everybody wants to hear, at every meeting that they have with their boss, but generally speaking, it's kind of like an end of year thing, right? So he says, great, okay, he gets the raise, whatever it may be. But in this example, right, let's say he didn't have that, right? He didn't have that meeting at the end of the year. His boss called him into the office, told him he was a great worker and he really loved what he was doing, and that was it, right? He said, hey, have a good weekend, have a good Christmas. So Michael left the office wondering, what the is going on? What I thought I was supposed to get a raise, and where's my bonus and all that other stuff. So he kind of left it be, right? He didn't question it, as many people don't, because they want to avoid that kind of uncomfortable situation, right? So he went on with the next year. So 2024, we already know that he should be on track to make $51,250 as salary, but that wasn't the case, so he's still at $50,000. And at the end of that year, at the end of 2024, let's say that the inflation rate was 2.5% as well, right? Same as the last year. Now he needs to be making not 51,250. Now, in order to have the same spending power that he previously did in 2023, he needs to be making $52,531, right? Because now we're 51,000 was the same spending power as 50,000. Now this is 51,250 is the new 50,000, and into 2024 now $52,530 is the new is the same spending power as $50,000, right? So it's constantly changing, and this is inflation, in effect right here. This is showing the same spending power year over year. So it's a pretty interesting to see when you see it like this. So in this example, if him not getting any kind of raise, obviously he's not keeping up, and this is basically the amount that he's losing out on, the amount that he should be receiving, year over year, to just keep up with inflation. Mind you, this is only keeping up with inflation. This isn't exceeding it. This is basically having the same spending power year over year, right? So this is a lot of missed out money, as you can see. So I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, well, Noah, you showed us how not receiving any kind of raise on a yearly basis really puts you behind, and it doesn't let you really get above and beyond inflation, and it's just a bunch of lost income. So at this point, I would like to share a couple ways in which, and a couple examples on what it really takes to go ahead of inflation, right? To try to beat it or at least equalize it. So on a year-to-year basis, you have the same amount of spending power that you did the previous year, if not more, right? We definitely want, at the minimum, the same spending power. And during economic downturns, certainly that can be the case, or it might even dip under. You might have a little bit less spending power, but in ideal circumstances, every year you would want at least the bare minimum, the same spending power, if not a little bit more for yourself. So in this example, again, we're dealing with Michael the Muppet Man. He, in 2023, as I said, obtained a $50,000 salary. So let's say that at the end of the year, he does get a raise, right? So he goes into the office, and his boss, manager, whatever, gives him $1,000 extra, not only as a one-time payment, but an increase to his overall salary itself. So now his boss will tell him, at the beginning of 2024, your first paycheck of the new year, you will be on track to receive $51,000 annually instead of $50,000. So that's pretty exciting for him, right? So he knows that he's going to be getting $1,000 extra. But as we know, the minimum that he would need to match inflation for the previous year is $51,250. So he did not keep up, right? And the difference is $250. So he's behind $250 behind inflation, right? So obviously that's not ideal. And I think a lot of people don't really consider this, so they'll accept the raise, thinking, okay, it's $1,000 or $800 or $500, that should be good, when in reality it clearly wasn't. So let's say his employer does match it, right? So $1,250 is what he adds to it. So in 2024, we can see that his salary did match the inflation that we saw at the end of 2023. So he's got the same spending power roughly going into 2024. So he did keep up with inflation, right? And the difference is zero. So like I said, this is the bare minimum that we want to see, on our income. So 2024 now. So let's fast forward to the end of 2024. Let's say, the company's doing well. They're creating a shit ton of Muppets or whatever they do, right? And he gets a bonus of $2,000, right? So end of 2024, his boss says, going into 2025, you will be receiving you will be on track to have a salary of 53,250, 2,000 more than you did this year. And he's all excited. It's almost double of what he did last year. And we can see, hypothetically, that in 2024, the inflation rate being at 2.5%, what he would need to make in 2025 is $52,531 to have the same spending power that he did initially, right? The initial $50,000. And sure enough, in 2025, he is on track to surpass that, right? He kept up with inflation, but he also beat it by $719, right? So that's great. That means he has the same spending power that he previously did. He kept up with inflation and he did more. That's an extra $719 in his pocket. So let's say, hypothetically, in this example, that the inflation rate is going to stay the same. He's going to stay at this company and he continues to receive $2,000 raises every single year. So the company is doing well. So they say your salary will increase by $2,000 year over year. So 53,000, 55, 57, 59, 60, 61. And this is great, right? Because if we're looking at this chart, clearly he is keeping up with inflation. And that's shown here, right? Because the income that he would need to make to keep up is 64,000, 831, and he's making 65. So he is ahead of the curve in this case, right? The interesting detail that we want to take a look at here is right here in the difference between his annual salary and the income that he would need to keep up with inflation. And you don't have to be, any kind of genius to determine that it's going down year over year, right? So this is interesting, right? Because we're looking and we're saying, well, he's getting $2,000 to his salary every single year without question. Yet it's going down. And what this means is that slowly but surely the inflation rate is going to catch up with him. So at the end here, this wasn't planned, by the way, but it just so happens to be in 2038, he beat it, yes, but by $69. So let's see if we go one more year. Okay, perfect. So if we go 2 more years, so now we are in the year 2039 or 2040, pardon me. He would finally be on track to lose to inflation, right? As we can see here, and that's negative $31. So he lost to the inflation for the previous year by $31, and that's reflected here as well, where his guaranteed salary from his employer, right? He was at 81,000. They said, hey, here's another $2,000 on your salary. You're at 83. He should be at 83,281, and he is just shy at 83,250. Now, if we continue this, right? If we continue this out, we can see that it goes in the reverse direction, right? It does, it's not too bad initially, right? He's negative 31, negative 81, and so on and so forth, but it starts looking a little bit different. And this isn't a huge margin, right? So you'd hope by, 2046, 20 years later that he's got things figured out. So this isn't necessarily the worst outcome. But certainly, you don't want these negative numbers early on in your working career, right? So what does this mean? This means that in order for Michael the Muppet Man to not only keep up but beat inflation in this case, so basically to continue to have the same spending power that he's got, that he had the previous year, as well as take home a little bit extra, he would need to be receiving initially a $1,250 salary bonus raise, but year over year he would need to be receiving $2,000 added to his salary every single year without question. Now we could, cut this down to the absolute bare minimum, right, to match it. So these are all zeros, but does that is that something that people generally want, right? If you think about it logically, you can make the argument that yes, you're keeping up with inflation, but year over year, your spending power is exactly the same, meaning you can, for the most part, only live the same type of lifestyle that you did the previous year. Nothing more. You could live less, right? But you couldn't live any more. You couldn't, buy the name brand milk if that's a thing, right? You'd have to continue buying the generic brand. I know that's a horrible example, but that's the case. Now, a lot of people, including myself, year over year, would like to not only keep up with inflation, but you want to augment your experiences, right? You want to keep up, but you want more, right? You want a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, to eventually you get to the point where you've kind of hit a peak and you're okay with what you have and what you're making and what you were able to do with your money. But if you're, as you can see here clearly, if he's not receiving these types of annual salary raises, that's just not going to happen, right? So let's change these to maybe we'll just keep it right. Well, 1,250, right? So clearly, every single year except for the first year where they matched inflation, he's behind, right? He's not even with inflation. He's actually behind it. So if we change this to something a little bit more, maybe 1,500 or something like that, he'll beat it for a little bit, right? Up until 2030, he's beating it by a little bit, but then right in 2031, he starts to go the other direction. So there's a few different ways that you can interpret this. You can interpret it as, you constantly have to be chasing an annual raise or pay increase that will not only match inflation but go over within your company, or by the time you cap off, as far as income goes in your company, which happens at many companies in the majority of positions at companies not only in the United States but internationally. You don't just continue to make money and money and money, the more money, more money, more money every single year. It usually plateaus in that position, right? So you have two options. You can either adjust your living style, so you live on less to make the money that you're making more, matter more, or you get a new job, right? You get a new job that has a $5,000 additional, amount that you can try to overtake or try to do better than inflation. And there we go. Those are the two examples of why it's so important to not only keep track of the inflation that's going on around you, but to also ensure that you're being compensated properly on a year-to-year basis for your hard work. With that being said, I hope you were able to take something away from this video. If you have any questions for me personally, or if you want to take a look at the services that I can provide to you, I've left my email and a link to my company website in the description box below. With that being said, thank you again for your time and happy financing. This will not only help you make sure that you're keeping up with inflation, but it would all